On September 23, 1908, a 19-year-old first baseman made one honest mistake, and it followed him for the rest of his life. His name was Fred Merkle. He played for the New York Giants. And for nearly 50 years, strangers who never met him called him one word, Bonehead. He was not a bad player. He was not lazy. He did exactly what every player of his era did on that kind of play. But on one September afternoon, in front of a roaring crowd at the Polo Grounds, Fred Merkle became the scapegoat for the wildest pennant race baseball had ever seen. This is the story of the most famous mistake in baseball history, and the man who could never outrun it. The summer of 1908 was chaos. 3 teams were locked in a death grip at the top of the National League: the New York Giants, the Chicago Cubs, and the Pittsburgh Pirates. They traded first place all season long. Every game mattered. Every out mattered. A single loss could bury a pennant that had taken 6 months to build. The Giants were the golden team. They had John McGraw, the fiercest, most feared manager alive. They had Christy Mathewson, the greatest pitcher on earth, a college-educated gentleman who threw a pitch nobody could hit. New York expected a pennant. New York expected a parade. The city could already taste it. On September 23, the Giants hosted the Cubs in a game that could tilt the whole season. The score was tied, 1-1, in the bottom of the 9th. 2 outs. A runner on first base, and that runner was Fred Merkle, a teenager making a rare start, filling in for an injured veteran, playing the biggest game of his young life. Then the Giants' shortstop, Al Bridwell, lined a clean single into center field. The runner on third trotted home with the winning run. The Polo Grounds erupted. Thousands of fans spilled out of the stands and swarmed onto the field. Giants win. Pennant alive. Bedlam. Except Fred Merkle never touched second base. He saw the winning run cross the plate. He saw the mob pour onto the grass. And like nearly every ballplayer did in that era, he peeled off toward the clubhouse in center field to avoid the crush of the crowd, before the play was ever truly finished. It was a habit. It was normal. Nobody thought twice about it. But one man on the Chicago Cubs was watching Merkle's feet. And that man knew the rulebook better than the umpires did. That man was Johnny Evers, the Cubs' second baseman, small, sharp, and relentless, a competitor who studied the rules the way a lawyer studies a contract. Evers understood something no one else in that stadium was thinking about. The rules said that if a runner is forced to advance and never reaches the next base, the defense can force him out there, and if it is the third out of the inning, no run can score on that play. Ever. Merkle had left the base path. He had never touched second. Technically, the play was not over. So Johnny Evers started screaming for the baseball. And here is the part that makes it extraordinary. This exact situation had already happened once that very season. 3 weeks earlier, in a game against Pittsburgh, a Pirates runner named Warren Gill had done the same thing, left the field without touching second on a winning hit. Evers had appealed then, too. The umpire that day waved it off and let the run stand. And the umpire that day was a man named Hank O'Day. Evers had lost that argument, but O'Day never forgot it. He had gone home and studied the rule. So on September 23, when the same play unfolded in front of him again, Hank O'Day was the one umpire in America who was ready for it. What happened next was pure pandemonium. The field was a churning sea of fans. The baseball was lost somewhere in the chaos. By some accounts, a Giants player grabbed the ball and hurled it deep into the crowd to keep it away from Evers. By other accounts, the Cubs scrambled and found a ball, maybe the ball, maybe just any ball, and relayed it to second. Historians still argue over which ball actually touched the bag. But it hardly mattered. Evers planted his foot on second base, held the ball high over his head, and screamed at the umpire. Hank O'Day made the call that rewrote the season. Merkle was out. Force out at second. Third out of the inning. The winning run did not count. The game was a 1-1 tie. The Polo Grounds had already emptied out. Tens of thousands of fans had gone home certain their Giants had won. It was too dark to keep playing and far too dangerous to clear the field. So the National League office was handed an impossible decision, and it ruled that if the Giants and the Cubs finished the season tied in the standings, this one disputed game would be replayed from scratch. Winner takes the pennant. One game for everything. They finished the season tied. Suddenly every game the Giants had lost all year carried unbearable new weight, because one tie, one untouched base, had erased a win they thought was already theirs. On October 8, 1908, the two teams met again at the Polo Grounds to replay the game. The city went insane. 250,000 people tried to get in. Fans climbed telephone poles and elevated train tracks to see over the walls. There were fires outside the gates. A man fell to his death from a viaduct. This was no longer a baseball game. It was a civic fever. Christy Mathewson, the greatest pitcher alive, took the mound for New York. And the Cubs beat him. Chicago won the replay, 4-2. They took the National League pennant, and then they went on to win the World Series. It was the last World Series the Chicago Cubs would win for 108 years. And Fred Merkle, he became the face of the disaster. Newspapers from coast to coast branded the play Merkle's boner. He was 19 years old, and overnight he was called the dumbest man in America. Fans jeered him. Sports writers buried him. The very word bonehead was pushed into the American language by what happened to that teenager on that afternoon. Here is the cruelest part of all. Fred Merkle did not break a rule. He did what every runner of his generation did, drifting off the base path once the winning run scored was ordinary, accepted, universal. Umpires had never once enforced the technicality before. Merkle was punished for a habit the entire sport shared, simply because he was the one standing there when an umpire finally decided to enforce it. And he was good. Fred Merkle was not some scrub. He played 16 seasons in the major leagues. He was a smart, respected first baseman who reached 5 different World Series across his career. Teammates called him one of the most intelligent players in the game. His own manager, John McGraw, a man famous for tearing players apart, refused to blame him, kept him on the roster, and even raised his salary. None of it could wash off the nickname. It followed Merkle into every ballpark, in every city, for decade after decade. The ruling left a trail of wreckage far beyond one man. Harry Pulliam, the president of the National League who had to defend the decision, cracked under the strain and the endless controversy. Less than a year later, he took his own life. The 1908 season didn't just cost the Giants a pennant. It broke people. Merkle rarely spoke about any of it. He carried it quietly, the way a man carries a stone lodged in his chest. In his later years he drifted away from the game almost entirely. When old ballplayers gathered to celebrate the sport's history, Merkle so often stayed home, dreading the whispers, the pointing, the one cruel word he could never leave behind. So why does a single base-running mistake from 1908 still matter more than a century later? Because it changed how the game is played. After Merkle, umpires began enforcing the touch every base rule to the letter. Runners stopped drifting toward the clubhouse before an inning was over. The sloppy, casual endings of the deadball era vanished for good. Every runner, in every game since, touches the next base, because of what happened to one teenager on one September day. Because it changed how we hand out blame. The 1908 pennant was decided by more than 150 games, by thousands of pitches, by countless small failures spread across an entire summer. But history didn't want that. History wanted one face, one name, one villain. And it chose the 19-year-old. Merkle became a lasting warning about how a crowd will crown a single scapegoat rather than admit that failure is complicated and shared. And because it planted the seed of the most famous curse in American sports. The Cubs won that 1908 title on the back of Merkle's mistake, and then did not win another for 108 years, the longest championship drought in the history of North American sports. The team handed a crown by a teenager's honest error would wait more than a century to touch one again. It is almost as if the game itself kept score. Fred Merkle died in 1956, still known to millions of people who never met him by a single word, Bonehead. He was a good player and a decent man who made one ordinary mistake on one extraordinary day, and paid for it for the rest of his life. So here is the question worth sitting with. When a single moment defines a person forever, when the whole world agrees on the villain and never stops to ask whether the story was fair, how many of the names we remember as fools were simply the unlucky ones standing closest to the mistake? Follow for more.